Alrighty, I think we'll get started. I'm Liz Powell. I am the founder and head of G2G Consulting, and I get to moderate these quarterly sessions where we talk about what is going on in Washington, D.C., or these days you might say, what the heck is going on? Because there's a lot going on. Today we've got three panelists joining me, all with distinct and awesome perspectives. What we usually do with these quarterly events is we start out with an introduction of our background. So before I started G2G, I worked on the Hill as a legislative director for a couple different members. That's my background. And I will pass to Chris Cooper for your background.
Thanks, Liz. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Cooper, and I am the Government Affairs Director in G2G's Washington, D.C. office. Before joining the firm, I spent more than a decade on the staff of two members of the Appropriations Committee in the House of Representatives. And during my time on the Hill, I served in a number of roles, including time as legislative director, chief of staff, and chief appropriations counsel. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And Chris Campbell.
Hey, everyone. I'm sure we're seeing a lot of new, same faces and similar faces, and hopefully some new faces. Chris Campbell, I spent way too much time on Capitol Hill, helping managing two committees, the Senate Judiciary Committee and Senate Finance Committee. I was later confirmed as Assistant Secretary of Treasury under the first Trump administration. Worked very closely with Obama on a trade agreement that never saw the light of day, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Pretty bipartisan guy, as you probably know, and look forward to our discussion today about what my old boss is up to today.
Thank you. And Chris Oates.
Hi, Chris Oates. I've been a political risk analyst since 2013, so seen quite a few changes in politics, and my job has always been to try to forecast it, lay out for our clients what the various scenarios are. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm very busy right now.
Yes. Righty. Well, thank you for that introduction. As you can see, we have an amazing panel. So much going on, from tariffs to stopping funding to removal of diversity, equity, inclusion, like all kinds of things are going on right now. But what I'd like to start is what the feel is, what's the vibe on Capitol Hill with what's going on. So would love to start with you, Chris Cooper.
Sure. And I'll preface my comments by saying, the mood on the Hill really depends on the office, as, some of the offices that we're meeting with, consider this to be a pretty dark time. Others are, excited that the president is acting quickly on some of his campaign pledges. But what I've seen so far this Congress, as I'm visiting with offices, is that there is this real underlying sense of anxiety, if you will, whether that's, the uncertainty around what move Trump and Elon Musk will make next, how the approaching government funding deadline is going to be addressed and when, what reconciliation will look like, and what we're seeing on the news with increased constituent engagement and communication regarding some of the recent administration actions and some of those impacts back home. So, it'll be interesting to see over time, specifically from my point of view, how moderate House Republicans who narrowly won re-election continue to navigate the sometimes contradictory messages and pressures from those vocal folks back home with, versus the messaging from the White House and from congressional leadership, as well as the pressure for those on the far right to deliver votes on, potentially things like a reconciliation package that won't cut spending as far as they'd like. So, a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. Okay. And then what's your perspective, Chris Campbell, as a former very senior official within Treasury under President Trump in the first administration, and then, all that you've done since then? Like, what's your perspective on how things are going in the vibe?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this, and it says right. There should be seeing no surprise. The president ran on significant change. He's now delivering that significant change. I think that he's, as he typically did in 2016, I think he tapped a vein of folks that were kind of frustrated with the status quo. And so he always moves at a very frenetic pace to help create and control the narrative. Is what he's in kind of, I think is what he's a genius at. So I think that, he's, he loves tariffs, he loves negotiating. And, I think that there's, certainly the president is not, he elicits strong feelings from anyone. It's hard to kind of be neutral on him. But he's doing, I think candidly, I think what he's doing mostly what he did on what he campaigned on. And we'll see how the report card goes. I think the Doge is definitely bringing a significant amount of change. I think, I probably imagine I speak to regularly with the administration now, and I think there is, I think the president also is much more strategic than he is given credit for oftentimes. So I think what he's doing now is going in with a mallet, effectively breaking everything and allowing his then team, who will be start to be confirmed in the coming months, to go in and help put Humpty Dumpty back together again and remake the government in the image that he ran on, and I think that he expects that the American people want. I will say, kind of parenthetically, as an American, and not it can again, and this most bipartisan way I can say it, it's saddens me, and it has saddened me that we as Americans have just come to the realization that when we're going to go to the DMV or do TSA, that we're just going to be treated like dog doo-doo, and and the government friction is going to be just horrible, and our interactions with the government are going to be just the worst of the world. I mean, try to call Social Security, try to call Medicare, Medicaid, CMS, try to get through that process without going to a member of Congress. Good luck. Right. So these are people. The government should serve us. We are the people. And so I think if we can try to find a way to even kind of put that back in parity, and suggest that those government servants are there to serve the people, I think is a real significant benefit. I think, and could be a significant benefit for the country. Now, things could get broken too badly, and maybe Humpty Dumpty can't be put back together again. It's something you have to watch carefully. But I think that irrespective of what jersey you wear, red or blue, I think we all agree on the government needs to be modernized, and there's just some changes that really hadn't necessarily been made. Politicians for generations have been promising it, and it's time to start moving the needle on this kind of stuff. And it's everyone hates change, and we'll see how it all goes at the end of the day, and how the report card happens in a year and a half when Congress is up for re-election. But so it's we're all as Americans and the world are along for the ride, and we'll see how it all goes.
Yeah, it's definitely a ride. And I think that there's a distinction between theory and practice. And where I think you use that word friction, which I think is a very good word. I think that's where we're seeing a lot of friction right now is the practice of trying to implement that theory. But Chris Oates would like to hear your perspective on things. You track this, all politics and government. I mean, you go deep on that. So what's your sense of the vibe and what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, well, as an analyst, I don't have to be diplomatic, so it's bad. It's really bad. It is worse than I expected. And here's it's not just I do vote Democratic, but it's not because of that. When I remember, before the election, trying to make forecasts about what's going to happen in this term, and I think like a lot of folks, I thought the tariffs were going to happen, but they would probably not be that big. Think like what we saw in February. They'd be proposed and they would go back down. At some point they would happen, but I kind of thought we'd have another couple months of this little dance. I thought Elon Musk would be just writing reports, kind of like, one of those, what you do as a politician with your rich supporters, you take a photo op and then you let them go. I did not think I would be getting texts from my cousin who works in the federal government of am I safe? They had to move their LGBTQ work support group onto Signal because they're all terrified of having their text leaked, like the transgender folks at DNI. And I didn't expect that. I thought there would be a change in our attitude towards Ukraine and, kind of pushing for a ceasefire. Didn't anticipate what that is, would happen on Friday. And I'm now getting texts from my friends around the world, because I lived in England for a long time. Like, is America done? I have a friend who works in a foreign ministry for a European country. And she's saying, like, basically right now, they are planning for a post-American world. Not Donald Trump's going to be a showman and he'll kind of sit with his arms crossed while Angela Merkel talks to him. They're saying, how do we, what are the plans we need to make to get off of Oracle? Because we can't trust them as our cloud provider. Do we buy that next tranche of F-35s, or do we invest in Typhoons and Rafaels? It is hard. And I have a friend in Canada who he's close with Canadian government there, and provincial government in British Columbia. And I've never seen him both prouder to be a Canadian and to just literally viciously hate America. I don't think it is we can communicate in the American media just how much our allies feel betrayed. And I mean, that's beyond what Elon Musk does. And so to me, what's difficult as an analyst to, go back from being an American to trying to be an analyst, I don't know what's going to happen. It is very difficult, near impossible for me to predict on a week-to-week basis what's going to happen. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about the government shutdown. I think that's going to happen. The reconciliation bill, again, I think that's going to happen. But what's going to happen with our international alliances, how they're going to respond, what's going to happen with the functioning of the federal government? At one point, do things just start breaking? I have no idea. And this is not what I felt like in 2017, where I thought I kind of have my finger on the pulse. I think to what Chris Cooper said, just anxiety and uncertainty, because this is not something we've seen before, either in Bush administration or the first Trump administration. So that's my little rant. Felt good to get that out.
Ah, thank you for that. So all of you guys have rattled off these terms. Let's just make sure folks are understanding where we are. So Chris Cooper, can you explain where we are with FY26, just like the high level version, FY26 or FY25, sorry, appropriations, wrapping that up, this potential shutdown, continuing resolution, just give us an explanation of that. And then they're starting this reconciliation process and the budget. So just like that quick overview so people have an understanding, and then we'll get into what it all means for the economy.
Sure. Yeah, for FY25, so at a high level, the fiscal year started October 1st of last year. The latest continuation of funding extended government funding until March 14th, so 10 days from now. And we're currently, it's not clear the path forward for Congress to avoid a shutdown, as Chris Oates said. It seems like the president and House Republicans are trying to coalesce around a full year continuing resolution, extending funding for the full fiscal year. And Democratic leadership is looking to see first, before throwing any support behind that proposal, if Republicans have enough votes to pass the rule and move toward a full year CR.
And your prediction?
I think they'll end up getting the CR done. There could be a temporary shutdown, but I think at the end of the day, a longer term shutdown is not good for anyone, and they'll all feel the pressure to get a deal done. So I think they'll probably end up with a full year CR and turn toward fiscal year 2026.
And will the CR pass with all Republicans, no Democrats, or is it going to be something that's in the middle?
They'll need Democrat support in the Senate. They can't do it without a number of Democrats supporting it. I know President Trump is going to try to court Freedom Caucus members apparently in the next few days to week to try to get their support for a CR. I don't know how successful that will be, but I think at the end of the day it will have to be bipartisan.
Okay, interesting. Chris Campbell, your thoughts on this and your predictions?
I think that the Democrats have had a difficult time reconstituting some kind of significant, kind of unified offense and defense against the president's actions, relying largely on the media to do that. And so I think there's a jockeying, I think, in the Democratic Party to kind of see who's going to be that voice and that face. That's still, that person is, I don't think we know that person yet. And so I think a shutdown is going to endure to their benefit. Congress almost never gets blamed in shutdowns. The president almost always does. And I think it's best for the Democratic Party. Everyone's going to hate to see how the sausage is made, but it's going to be good for them to have a unified attack line against this president. And I think that a government shutdown will give them that. So I think that Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party and Democrat senators are going to be largely hard to pin down on what a CR looks like. And I think we're in a first shutdown.
All right. And Chris Oates, what do you think in your predictions?
I agree. I was checking the prediction markets earlier, and they say probabilities that there will be a shutdown of less than a month. So long, but not the longest in history again, for what that's worth. I think I agree. It's very difficult right now for the Democratic Party to have leadership. I personally think Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are not great at their jobs. I think they're relatively weak leaders. I think it's not a coincidence they both come out of Brooklyn. New York City politics is not, it doesn't gear you up for kind of fighting the other side. You or tend to be, inside managers, which is fine in a congressional leader when you're mostly herding the cats. But it does mean that you don't have the person who is going out to talk to the general public on a daily basis, which a government shutdown would help, because there would be the constant press attention to what's going to happen. And whether that is Schumer, whether they hand that over to, I believe it's Patty Murray is the top appropriator who might take the lead. I think so. There would be then the chance for that one voice to speak for the party. And it likely would come from the Senate. To me, the question, and this is how I don't know how we get out of it, is that I think they could fudge the numbers. And I thought going into it, I thought there might be a government shutdown. Going into this administration, there might be a government shutdown for the CR, but I thought not likely. And the real question is Musk and the impoundment of funds, because Democrats want language in there to basically say we are appropriating this money and it has to be spent. And Republicans don't want to do that. There was talk of, that violates the separation of powers, or do they just not want to alienate their own president? Whatever the reason, I think that is a difficult binary to solve, because you can't just you can't fudge that in the same way that you can fudge a budget. So that's what I'll be interested to see. Will there be, after say a week of a shutdown, some sort of compromise where Republican leadership in the House and the Senate say, we will make sure that the oversight committees are on this, and that's our promise to you, and you can hold us to it at the next CR. I think it's right that it does benefit the Democratic Party to do that, but at some point, for the government shutdown to end, either the one side backs down or there's a compromise. And I think it's a difficult position for both parties to be in, the compromise being difficult and then them not wanting to back down.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Let's talk about the economy and how tariffs, the USAID freezing of that spending, all those programs, the removal of diversity, equity, inclusion, basically being scrubbed from all these departments and programs, the firings, the rehirings, these new secretaries, everyone from RFK Jr. to Hegseth, controversial, interesting folks trying to say that diplomatically. We've got the Ukraine, that we all saw at the Oval Office fight that occurred. So how are all these things impacting the economy? And I know, Chris Campbell, you're an expert on sort of dealing with the economy, advising businesses on that. So what's your take on all of this and how it's impacting the economy now, and maybe what you see happening throughout the rest of the year?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it could probably take a week to answer this one. So there's just a lot going on. Any incoming administration that takes over from from the other team will have a quarter or two to blame the former team, right? Then they own the economy. So all signs point to probably a negative GDP growth in the first quarter of this year. The current administration will blame the past administration on that. I think that the Trump administration, Trump 2.0, has a significant challenge, and that is that they're coming in a raising inflationary environment, which is tough. Candidly, again, to be as nonpartisan as I can be, that the Biden administration at the very end of the administration pushed out a ton of money. All the some like people who didn't get like PPP loans or people who didn't get kind of COVID related money that didn't apply for it, they actually just put it in their bank accounts. So the Americans actually just saw a lot of money. A lot of Americans saw a lot of money that they didn't even apply for. The government thought that they were owed. Push that through through the ERC, which is a tax benefit that for businesses that qualify for PPP loans. They're just hundreds of billions of dollars were pushed out at the very end of the administration, which will have an inflationary impact. And so, there's just there, and this is one of the things that the president ran on. So, the president's gone out there and said that, but again, two quarters of negative growth, and including and raising inflation rate, it's called stagflation. That's really, really bad for the economy. And so the question is going to be, this is largely theoretical until we see it, and that is that if the Trump administration, when they're coming in and significantly and quickly lowering the threshold on regulation, bringing down the cost of energy as fast as they can, and then through reconciliation, lower tax rates across the board, mostly favoring those in the lower end, might that counterbalance the negative, the inflationary process, as well as the depression in GDP. It's who knows? I mean, they were able to put the secret sauce together in the first administration when I was there. Not that I had much to do with it, but it was one of the largest, greatest periods of expansion we've seen in a really long time. And the best way that a government can do. Best things the government can do to fight a negative or trending negative economic data is to start economic growth. And so start companies being created, start companies starting to grow. That there's can you counterbalance that? I mean, look at just the state of Arizona alone. Apple has a $500 billion commitment over the next 10 years, and then TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor, has a multi-billion-dollar commitment. So then there's so there's just there you're starting seeing a shift in manufacturing favoring the administration and favoring growth. But it's just, it really kind of depends on how much that happens. There will be a reduction in government spending through DOGE. So that will pull back some of the inflation, and then putting the government workers, taking them off the employment rolls, is going to affect obviously employment data, but we'll also have we'll have a deflationary. It'll slow the pressure on inflation, and so all of those things put together, I just really don't know if the equation is going to balance. But it's the government throwing everything they can to try to counter the negative GDP growth and then the high inflation without additional government spending. So it's going to be a great experiment. We'll see how it goes. I think that if I were betting, I'd probably bet that the equation roughly balances. The one thing I didn't put into that equation is tariffs. It will depend on how high and how long they're in place. They will have a slight inflationary impact. That inflationary impact can be offset by regulations, and also by the reduction in taxes. And so we'll see how that works out at the end of the day. But it's going to be bumpy for a while. It's going to be choppy, and the challenge is the incoming administration. It's always words always used from administration to administration, but we're seeing the raw economic data, and that is that we had inflation. They inherited inflation, and they've inherited negative economic growth. And so we'll see what they do in Q2, the back half of the first 100 days, to see what they can do to right that all of that economic data.
Okay, and I'm going to circle back to you on taxes, because I know that's your expertise, and there's a little tax plan going on right now that we want to make sure we cover. So Chris Oates, I want to hear from you on all of these actions that are taking place right now under this administration and how it is impacting the public perception, polling, and like the political side, like how is that impacting the party? Like what, I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have a ton of polling just yet because it is still relatively early. But the last polling that I saw, and I checked it a few days ago, Trump is now underwater. He is now the second most unpopular president this time of his presidency, beaten only by himself in his first term. Elon Musk is deeply underwater. I think I saw it was like 32 in favor, 48 opposed. He was actually the worst person ever tested in a Democratic poll in Wisconsin. They said Democrats had 1% approval of Elon Musk, 94% against, and they were like, this is remarkable. So that I think tells you a few things. One is Democrats are upset. The Democratic voter base is deeply upset with the way the country is going, and also deeply upset with their own party leadership. The Democratic Party, or at least the leadership, has I think like a -20 rating, which is very hard to do. It's their worst rating ever, and I think a lot of it is a reflection of anger at the party leadership for not pushing Joe Biden out earlier, Joe Biden himself, and then what they've done so far, which many say are not as interesting. So I think what we're seeing is similar to 2017, a kind of within the Democratic Party resistance building up. Differently, though, is it's not there. There isn't that kind of congressional leadership. Independents are interesting. I saw had a 34% approval of Trump, which is a worrying sign. I think what we're going to see is maybe two things, and this is again still uncertain, and it is still very early. Do we start to see Republicans get worried? I believe today, Republicans in Congress were told not to hold any town halls because people shouting at them looks really bad. That's not a good sign. That reminds me of Democrats in 2009 where they held town halls. They got shouted at. It went viral. So, but do Republicans start to get really worried? We have a special election coming up in New York's 21st district, which is on the Canadian border. That is Elise Stefanik when she eventually, I don't know if she has resigned or not, but she's eventually going to go to the UN. That's an R+9 district, so it should be a safe one for a special election. But special elections are weird. They have low turnout. And on the Canadian border, the tariffs might be particularly important. So if Democrats win that special election, which again is very unlikely, but that would be a bit like I think Scott Brown in 2010 winning the Senate in Massachusetts, a sign to the rest of the party to be worried. Now, I would then ask, especially with one less vote, could they get the tax cut done? I would say they still probably could, but Mike Lawler in New York is planning to run for governor of New York. He doesn't want to be tagged with having voted for that. Does that make it difficult? So probably will still go through, but I think the Republican Party is going to get worried. With the Democratic Party, I think they now have a galvanizing influence. Losing voters who make under $100,000 last November was a giant shock to their system. And so it takes a while for them to kind of get back on their feet to find their voice. But I do think being able to go against Elon Musk and whatever tax cuts happen are going to be there. Two questions I think that still are to be seen. Where do independents move? Is this just kind of a reaction to the chaos of Elon Musk? Do they go back more towards a 50-50? And do Democrats start getting worried about primaries? Because in 2018, that was something that started to happen where you started to see Democrats being a little bit worried about primary fights. And certainly since then, you now have 6 years of kind of building up tensions of, let's be honest, a geriatric leadership. My Senator Ed Markey is going to be 80 years old running for re-election in 2026. So like, does someone primary him? Do people start to, do younger generations start to build up? Again, that would have kind of a destabilizing effect. It would push Democrats to be more obstructionist because you don't want to be outflanked to the left. And it also might make Republicans a little bit nervous. And again, the big thing I think where you would see this is reconciliation. But I don't know enough about reconciliation, the actual where the members are right now, to make a definite judgment. I think it would pass. I'd say like 70% it would pass, but it might be a little bit scaled down at the behest of some of the members.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Chris Cooper and I both have been talking with members from both sides of the aisle. And I had a fascinating conversation with a Republican member on Friday about what happened with the whole with the vote on the budget resolution and how close it was. They were leaving and then they were called back. and just in the nick of time got just, the votes they needed to pass it. So that was a huge moment for Republicans. I mean, like, that's a real victory because many were concerned they'd never be able to do that. And it took a lot of arm twisting, what we heard from Trump and his team, to get those final votes. So it's an interesting climate right now, and we're also hearing from both the Democrats and Republicans that this fear of primaries is what's driving a lot of the action, the legislative action or inaction, in Washington. So, this primary, it's like we just had elections. Many, people would be like, what? Elections isn't for another 2 years. However, it's constantly on the minds of these folks in Congress. So it's an interesting factor. I would love to ask you, Chris Cooper. We had these nominations go through, and there's something like 800, by the way, that have to go through the Senate process for all these different appointee positions. What's your sense? Some of these secretaries are controversial, many, in these political appointees. What's your thoughts on how much power do they really have? And if you want to give examples of some that jump out to you, I think that would be interesting for folks to hear.
And when you say how much power they have, are you talking about the secretaries or the senators that have
The
approved them?
secretaries and the political appointees, because so many of them are controversial. How much, damage, or what can they do really?
Yeah, I think what we saw so far is the vast majority, virtually all of Trump's cabinet nominees have been confirmed at this point. I think one outstanding is still the Secretary of Labor nominee, a former Congresswoman from Oregon. But what we've seen so far is a handful of Senate Republicans express concerns with some of the more controversial nominees, particularly Senator McConnell, I know, has voted against a couple of the national security related nominees. Senator Murkowski and Senator Collins have also expressed concerns and voted against a few of the nominees, but they've stopped short of overall as a Senate conference, blocking them so far. So they're giving some leeway for these folks to be put in place because they were selected by the president, and overall they think he should have his nominees in place at these agencies to take the action that he ran on and is looking to implement. But especially for some of these more controversial ones, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at HHS, Pete Hegseth at Department of Defense, they probably have a little bit of a shorter leash with folks on the Hill and what they're willing to accept before they start to more publicly push back on actions that are being taken at the departments.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of it's the power of the podium, and what they can emphasize or de-emphasize. And interestingly, the last remaining one is probably the least controversial. She's a moderate. She was a moderate Republican who barely lost re-election. So it's interesting that she's that final one. So Chris Campbell, I have a question for you. If you were in Congress yourself as a Republican, what is the best strategy to navigate this? And then pretend you're a Democrat. And what would be the best strategy as a Democrat member of Congress?
Yeah, so Liz, a great question, but it also greatly depends on where I'm a member, right? It's like, if am I in a swing district? Am I in a purple state, right? That really, 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 really matters. So let's just talk about, like, I'm in the most red state and district, and I'm in the most blue state. So again, I mean, so obviously, if you're a team player and you're on the president's team, you're going to vote for him and whatever he's going to do, right? Be very supportive of him. I think this puts out a broader question you didn't ask, but I'm going to answer real quick. And there's an open question in my mind, and a lot of my clients' minds, kind of more the billionaire crowds, that are we seeing a fundamental realignment in the party and in the structure of America, or are we seeing a Trump one-off again? And I really don't know the answer to that question. Really, we'll all know the answer to that question in November of next year. when Congress, gets the scorecard. President Trump has not proven he has an enormous amount of coattails, but if he is able to retain Congress, I think we're seeing a realignment. One of the biggest challenges, I think, structurally, that the Congress is going to have, and that is if as the Republicans put together, the president puts together this reconciliation package, it's a very large bill. It's going to be passed. It's going to include a lot of tax cuts and probably some significant spending reductions. If put together right, and for the audience, I used to run the Senate Finance Committee. Finance Committee usually puts together the reconciliation packages for the Congress. So I put together a lot of them over my time. This package is like this reconciliation package is going to include no tax on tips, reductions in Social Security taxes, probably to remove more Americans from the tax rolls themselves, largely built and on what the president's promises were on taxes, right? And perhaps some SALT relief for high tax states. And so if the president's able to deliver that, and you're a Democrat in Congress, and you're in a high tax state like New York or New Jersey or California or something like that, and you vote against this, you're voting against the interests of your constituents. One thing I think that I'm fascinated about, the thing that I above all, what I'm looking at most about all of this is the Democratic Party cannot, I've been around politics too long, Democratic Party cannot reconstitute without the power and the support of unions. They will not be able to come together again for a long, long time until they get a leader who is able to talk to blue collar workers. And so if they lose that male union vote and Trump is able to capture that male union vote, we're likely seeing a realignment that will last for quite some time, like Reagan did. And so if that happens, we're going to, and so if you're a Democrat and union workers, like what happens if you're in Vegas, right? And you're going to vote against no tax on tips, and that's not going to go well if you're for your union constituents. If the Democratic Party, and I don't mean to be non-PC about this at all, but if the Democratic Party starts and maintains their dependence on and their adherence to social issues like trans and other issues, I just, like it or not, I mean, blue collar workers, that's just not what drives them. In fact, they probably pushes them the other direction. And so I don't know where the Democratic Party goes with this stuff, but they're going to be in really difficult times because they're losing a core constituency that they have to win again. And so I think the only way, little me, what I think the Democratic Party has to have is someone like Bill Clinton that comes back, speaks common sense to social issues, and is an economic populist. We're seeing just the opposite. The Democratic Party is largely moving to the left and trying to find a way through that process. I just don't see how you win those blue collar union workers back hugging the left. I could be wrong. We'll see. But I think, we'll see that in about a year and a half and see how that goes. Members of Congress, I think, it's been popular for 8 years to try to beat the crap out of President Trump. It's not gone well. So I wish them luck. They can continue trying to do that. He's been reelected popularly. He's increased his numbers, and we may be looking at a realignment of politics. So I think that they're going to have to take a different tact in order to win back those voters and be very, very sophisticated and very strategic on how they do that.
Okay. And Chris Oates, what's your take on the Democratic strategy versus a Republican strategy?
Governing is harder than being in opposition. So I think that Republicans have a very difficult decision to make with this tax bill, because either you explode the deficit, which they've said for years, decades, they didn't want to do. And then it seems hypocritical, giving tax cuts to billionaires where the rest of us are going to have to pay for, putting the tax cuts to billionaires on the national credit card. I mean, that's an easy line to do. Or you, as the kind of budget framework indicates, huge cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. And then again, easy line, get tax cuts to billionaires paid for by your Medicaid. So I think for Republicans, it's going to be difficult. How do you strike that balance and how do you message that? Because you're right, there is going to be a furious voice on the other end of the phone if you don't vote for it. And in 2017, that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was one of the Donald Trump's lowest moments of popularity. It was the ACA repeal and then the TCJA, and that I don't think was matched until 2020. Because as Chris said, economic populism is a winning argument. It has been for 200 years, ever since Louis the whatever walked up the steps. So the question I think for Democrats is, I think you're right. There was a huge emphasis on social issues during the Biden administration. I think there's a lot of factors I could go on for hours about it. I think a lot of it is social media, the fact that Biden didn't really command the stage as well, but also just kind of when you're in power, you start arguing with yourself. I think it becomes much easier when you're in opposition. It's easier to tell everyone to be quiet about whatever issues are dominating blue sky at that moment because we're focused on defeating tax cuts for billionaires. So I think that's going to be the message for me. If I were in Congress as a Democrat, I think the big thing is they shouldn't be spending that much time in Congress. They should be spending time doing every single podcast known to men, specifically to men. There was that whole argument about who's the Joe Rogan of the left after the election. I think that's the wrong answer, the wrong question. The wrong question is who is the Democrat that will go on Joe Rogan and start to make inroads with that audience? And then do they have plans for what they're going to do if they were to win that they could present to the voters of, you elect us, we're going to do this, with the caveat that 2027 to 2028, they won't have the presidency. So a lot of it is kind of, I think, building the party in the grassroots for a possible trifecta. What are the plans for a trifecta and how do you get there? And I do think that economic populism is the way to go. And I also think an interesting thing is for the Senate, do they start to encourage independent candidates to run like Osborne of Nebraska? I believe it was Nebraska last year, Nebraska or Kansas. I keep mixing them up because I studied the Civil War too much. But do they start to basically have a strategy where there's going to be a quasi three-party system where there is the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and then in mountain or plain states, there's going to be independent Democrats. So there's a lot of ways they can go, but I think we can't really predict this. I think there's going to be a lot of basically trial and error. And then folks like an AOC in 2018 will come along, maybe a Sherrod Brown-esque figure in South Dakota will come along, or in Iowa, and then people will say, oh, of course, that was going to be the template. So we don't know now, but I think in 2027, there's going to be a lot of people who had perfect hindsight.
Great. That's very helpful. Okay, so we're getting some questions in, so I'm going to shift to the questions coming in. How would a shutdown impact air travel? Who wants to take that one?
I can say at a high level, depending on how long a shutdown would last, there could be some impacts, but by and large, air traffic controllers, TSA agents, those folks are considered essential and they would continue in their duties during a shutdown.
Okay. How is the SBIR funding looking? I think it's up for reauthorization this year by the end of September. And will there be a pile of money in August and September for spending? Let's take that one. Go ahead.
Cooper, that's down the center for you, isn't it?
I was going to say, you're correct. I believe the latest SBIR reauthorization expires at the end of the fiscal year. So I would expect Congress to move toward reauthorizing that again as we get closer. I know both the House and Senate are holding hearings on some of the issues within SBIR as they move toward reauthorization. As far as whether there'll be some pot of money toward the end of the fiscal year, I don't think that would be the case. The one exception would be if there's some sort of supplemental funding request, usually after something like natural disasters that occurred, or where there's a real need for congressional action to appropriate additional resources for critical issues.
Okay, and then sorry, I missed also in the question was Doge or a comment. Doge is going after the technical and business assistance program, which is helps NIH grant recipients. So I guess they're going after that as well. Doge is going after everything. The one thing I will say, the SBI program is so bipartisan. There's so much strong support for that program. So I cannot believe they would ever get rid of the SBI program. It's a percentage of every federal department that spends $100 million on research. So that is so universally popular and it keeps us globally competitive as a nation. So I don't see that going away. One comment I will add to that, though, and something we've been fighting is the R&E tax. So companies that apply for SBIRs, they actually win the awards, very competitive. And then 90% of that grant award is taxable under the current law that was part of the Trump tax plan law in his first administration. So many of us are working to get rid of that in this effort to work through reconciliation and the new tax legislation. So that is something that I encourage people to advocate for because I think it's sort of like a little piece that maybe folks don't know about. But the more members are educated on it, the more, again, bipartisan support for getting rid of that too. So you will find on a lot of issues, there's actually bipartisan support. It's just you don't hear it in the press and in social media. But there, on those common sense issues, there's actually a lot of bipartisanship. So just to give some hope to the process. All right. Where will there be elections? Musk is inside all the systems. So I guess they're sort of like what's happening to our electoral process if Musk can just drop 20 million here, there, everywhere to control who runs and what the politicians do. So that is open for whoever would like to answer that one.
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, yes, there will be elections. They're state run and local run. I think the question is for, does Musk drop 20 million on a primary? That is clearly something hanging over the heads of Republicans. Allegedly, when Tom Tillis said he was hesitant about Hegseth, Trump was on Air Force One with a number of congressmen from North Carolina. He just turned to them and said, who wants an endorsement for a primary? With the provision that Musk will fund. This is different. I don't know what's going to happen. I would assume that there won't be too many primaries. It looks like the threat of it will happen, but we've never had, I think, the world's richest man so invested in politics before, maybe since the 1800s. So I actually have a question for Chris Cooper. I don't know if this relates to the audience, but I know the Farm Bill keeps getting kind of slightly reauthorized, but we haven't had a full 5-year reauthorization. It has, obviously a huge amount of money, not just for farmers, not just for nutrition, but for a lot of agricultural technical companies and startups who can try to sell into it or win grants. Do you see any movement on that there will be a full 5-year farm bill, or will it just be kind of a series of rolling extensions?
That's a good question. I know that at a high level, it usually revolves around Republicans pushing more on that farm side and Democrats expressing concerns with potential alterations or even cuts to the nutrition assistance um, portion of the farm bill. I believe at least one of the chambers released a draft of what they would wanted to pass as a farm bill at the end of the last Congress. But I don't see it necessarily reaching a critical level where they're really trying to push it through, given at least in the short term, given um, the pending government shutdown as well as the real push to do reconciliation. I think that will suck up a lot of air in the room as they're trying to count those votes with just a 1 seat Republican majority in the House, particularly. I think there will be a lot of just effort spent trying to make sure they can get that through and deliver on that promise to extend the Trump tax cuts from 2017.
Yeah, interesting. The other interesting thing is there's actually been a couple, and this is sort of quietly reported by the press, but a couple times where the Trump administration has actually sided with the Biden administration. So one is around LDTs or lab developed tests. They actually chose to argue to defend Biden's determination that the government would oversee those tests. And then they also sided with the Biden administration around Obamacare coverage requirements for preventative services. So there's interesting things. And then another one is the drug pricing, which Trump was very strong on in his first administration. And now we've got this drug pricing plan that was established under the previous administration. So there is some interesting dynamics going on. And with RFK's, real focus on chronic conditions and diseases and what they can do to in preventative side of things as far as children. They've got a report due out in about 100 days on that issue. So there are some interesting dynamics. And then the other side of it, many are worried about the Medicaid cuts. Like, do you think that there'll really be $800 billion worth of Medicaid cuts, or do you think that's sort of just put out there as a parameter and they'll negotiate down? What are your thoughts on some of those actions that are happening in that health space? Chris Cooper, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know exactly where they'll end up number wise, but this gets to the push and pull that is going to have to happen, and the headaches for particularly House Republican leadership and Speaker Mike Johnson trying to protect vulnerable, more moderate or blue state Republicans that barely won re-election last cycle from some of those attacks on cutting Medicaid and other services that they're hearing from constituents about, against the far right members that already don't think the proposed spending reductions go far enough for their vote. And again, they only have a 1-seat cushion right now. So I don't know where that number will end up, but it'll be a lot of intimate meetings with different groups of the Republican conference to try to figure out what that path forward looks like.
Yeah, Chris Campbell, what do you think?
Yes, this is going to be a difficult needle to thread, let's say it that way. I think that there's yeah, I don't know. Like Cooper's closer to this than I am. Like on the tax stuff, I think that I think it will largely pass. I think it'll be largely filled with populism, economic populism, which I think will be very easy to sell in congressionals in a year and a half. Where it really comes down to is the cuts on Medicaid, Liz, as you suggested. So, and the ability for Democrats to be able to message that in a way that really matters. And so I think. It's just really, it's a, for those who, the audience who don't know, Medicare is something, is a government program that's largely targeted to people over 65. Medicaid is the assistance given from the government, from the federal governments to the states, usually to administer for populations that are kind of at the lower end of the economic scale. And so those are. There's certainly a lot of changes that should be made in Medicaid. It's a largely a very inefficient way of providing healthcare. These are populations that typically tend to go to the emergency room more than they do a doctor's office for problems. And so it's extremely expensive. It drives up the cost of care. But at the end of the day, so there's certainly modernizations and streamlining that can happen in the program. At the end of but cutting $1 trillion, nearly $1 trillion, that is going to be, it will be felt. There will be impacts in the states. I think that again, for those that haven't been paying attention, some states have opted for expansion in Medicaid funding. And others did not. Those that did, largely blue states, not all, but largely blue states, will be impacted harder than those that didn't choose to take the expansion money from the federal government. And so those will, if you're playing teams, if you're in your red versus blue jerseys are on not exclusively, but the blue jersey will be blue jersey, and governors in blue jersey states will be and representatives will be feeling the pain more than those that did not. But the way that the budget's set up, that sets up the parameters and the rules for reconciliation. It makes it really difficult. There's going to have to be reductions in spending, and those reductions in spending are largely going to be on those Medicaid funds. And so, so yeah, I think that states will be impacted on this. Again, largely the biggest states, which are usually blue states. And, is the president able to offset that, or the congressional Republicans able to offset that with reductions, or, like some tax benefits on salt and other issues that perhaps could offset some of the pain that's going to be felt by those states. I don't really know. It's going to be a real challenge, as Cooper suggested. The Republican Party is, it's a big tent, and so you have, moderates that are going to be very favorable to Medicaid spending, and the kind of Freedom Caucus, more committed conservatives, are going to be, okay with no government spending at all, zero. And so, like how you find that watermark and keep them all in the tent is going to be really, really, really difficult in this go around, especially with the numbers the way they are in the House. But I think if put together right, Oates may disagree with me on this, but I think a populist package could easily be put together, which could get some Democratic votes, certainly in the Senate. And so I think, and that's what I'm really looking for. I think, again, if you're a Democratic senator from Nevada or Arizona or some of those kind of more swingy states, and you vote against taxes on tips or reductions in Social Security taxes, it's going to be really hard, I think, to win re-election. So we'll see how it goes. But I think the Republicans have their work cut out for them to probably put together a package that meets the populist message, economic message of the president, and maintains the demands of the committed conservatives in the House for great reductions in spending.
All right, Chris Oates.
Well, the one thing I'd add to that is that because these are Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cuts, they will lapse at the start of 2025. So there is this looming deadline, which I think will help get the Republican caucus to vote for it, because it's not just that you're saying, well, we're voting for this or we're voting for nothing. It's we're voting for this or taxes will go up. So I think that will be a force that will keep the party together. And so, yeah, I expect it will pass, but I expect something will pass. What the actual details are, I can't forecast that now. That's what that's what folks like Chris Cooper do to keep us up to date.
Awesome. This has been such a great discussion. I have a final bit of a silly question for you. So the end of this year, end of 2025, do you think Trump will be happy, sad, or mad? Chris Cooper.
I think he'll be happy, because I think, to what they just said, I do think Congress will eventually agree on a reconciliation package that accomplishes much of what he ran on. And I think, to tie that in, some of what we're going to hear tonight in his speech, he will tout actions that have happened already on the border and will likely increase. He'll tout some of the administration actions to push back on things like DEI and their push on biological men competing in women's sports and things like that. So I think overall he'll be happy.
Chris Campbell.
I totally agree.
That was fast. And Chris Oates.
I mean, he's not on trial for January 6th, so he's very happy.
Ha. All right. I don't think it'll be as smooth sailing. I think that there will be some interesting things before us. But in any case, another fascinating discussion. Thank you all for joining. We will send out the recording and stay tuned for our next round. We do this each quarter. Thank you so much and have a great day.